Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another special program we are hosting at the CNY RISE Center. It has been become a tradition for us now that last 2 years we have been hosting RISE talks to take a special topic and have a guest speaker and just kind of share our ideas and inspirations with one another to make sure that we can build that kind of connections together. In the past, we talked about the healthcare impacts of COVID to our neighborhoods in the South Side. We talked about the non-violence in the religion. And today our topic will be Martin Luther King's vision and also his community service and all the leaders of the civil rights movement and their initiative for the community service. That will be our topic tonight. Let me go ahead and also introduce myself that maybe some of you do not know. My name is Tim Saka and I am the board president for the CNY RISE Center. My daytime job, I'm a librarian at the Anadolu Community College. But in the evening time, I am also serving at the CNY RISE Center. We have a building on the south side of the city. And normally we do these kind of conversations and talks at our wonderful building. But because of the COVID, unfortunately, we have to now do our events virtually. But we are hoping that later on in the future, we will be able to go back to our center and serve you our wonderful Turkish tea and our soups and quick little snacks or something, so we can have a good conversations around the table. So coming back to the topic tonight, we will be talking about the whole perspective of the Black History Month, and especially a number of our members are immigrants in this country, and they have not grew up listening to the stories of the civil rights movement and what happened into this country. And I have been doing more and more research recently, and I've been learning that a lot of rights right now earned by the immigrants actually goes back to the civil rights movement. That the immigrants to the country were able to get a lot of rights and place in this country because people were fighting and protesting for the civil rights movement, that it became as a law later on in the country. So we have a lot to learn and understand with this perspective through the civil rights movement. And also we have learned later on that the civil rights movement, especially with Martin Luther King, was heavily involved with the community service. That was a big piece of it. And CNY RISE Center has the motto that we say, we rise by lifting others. That is all our perspective, our center anyway. That the reason that we built that center was serving others. And I want to go back also to our acronym RISE, that our R is respect. That we would like to start our relationship by respecting one another. And then after we build that respect with each other, the next step is we should share our inspirations together. Whatever inspires you, you can share with me, and whatever inspires me, I can share with you. And tonight we will talk about that. For example, Martin Luther King and other civil rights movement leaders have been inspiring many people, many generations, even in this country or over the other countries. I also personally have my own inspirations from my Turkish background, that Mr. Fethullah Gülen, that he was kind of an inspirational Sufi scholar in Turkey, and right now he lives in Pennsylvania, and he was teaching me about how to care and serve others. Many people around me was constantly asking me, do not trust anybody, focus on yourself, build a good life, get rich, make a better life for yourself. But he was telling me differently. He was telling me that the happiness and the better society will become when we serve one another. And that helped me to change my perspective. Especially, I wanted to bring maybe teach a new terminology that comes from Arabic. That in Arabic, it is called Isar. That's a famous Arabic word. In the Quran, it passes also that it's called Isar, and in English translation means you choose your brother or sister over yourself. that you are not just helping them or serving them, you are actually choosing them over to yourself. And there's a famous story from the Prophet Muhammad's time, peace upon him, that as a small Muslim minority group, they were oppressed a lot in the city of Mecca, that many of whom were going hungry, they had nothing to eat. One day when Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, was sitting with his friends together, another friend came through the door and he said he hasn't eaten for days. He was so hungry. He said, can anybody help me? I gotta eat something. And Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, his heart was broken. He wanted to help this friend, but he couldn't. He didn't have anything to eat himself either. So he asked other people around him and he said, is there anybody here who can help this friend? That we need to be able to support him or something. So one person raised a hand and said, I can take him to dinner to my home tonight. So he took him to his house as a dinner as a guest. He told his wife, let's put one more plate on the table and let's eat together. So after the evening was finished, they came back to the same mosque, the same place with Prophet Muhammad. But this time, Prophet Muhammad upon him was shocked. He said, what happened last night? Because whatever happened between you guys, he said, God sent me a new verse in the Quran, that the Quran is talking about your friendship. What happened in the last night that God had to send a verse about your experience? What happened? So after so much questioning, later on we have learned that even the guy who volunteered to take us home didn't have much to eat himself either. He had only enough for one person as a food. And if he himself or his family would eat, his guests wouldn't have nothing to eat anymore. There was only a limited amount of food there. So what he made a deal with his wife, that while they served the food, they made an agreement to by make an accident and turn off the candle so it will be dark. So the guests would not know what's happening. And the owner of the house would just bring his spoon back and forth empty. So he wouldn't eat. He would just kind of pretend eating and clunking the spoon to the bowl or something, but not eat. So there will be enough to eat for the guest coming in. And God has seen this, that they were the perfect example of the Esau, that they choose their brother over their own hunger, that they were hungry themselves, but they let their guests to eat first, and they went to bed hungry that night. And Prophet himself says that if your neighbor is going to bed with an empty stomach, while you are going to the bed with a full stomach, he said, you are not one of us. You are not a true Muslim if you are going with a full stomach while your neighbor is going to bed with an empty stomach. And I learned all these stories and examples from Fethullah Gülen. He was my inspiration, that he was saying that serve others first, choose them over yourself first in there. And then after I came to the United States, I also saw the examples of Martin Luther King and other civil rights movement leaders, that I was getting inspired by them also. So tonight we'll be talking about their story and how we can initiate more community service in our community, in our city. So please let me go ahead and share a quick video that talks about Martin Luther King's perspective about how to be active in our society and how to do community service. So give me 1 second and let me share that with everybody.
Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving.
I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness.
By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. Because everybody can serve.
Our country, this wonderful place, this little piece of real estate that we call America, was built, founded on service. We didn't necessarily wait for local, state, or the national government. We came together as a people and we just did it.
I was one of 4 6-year-old children, girls, to integrate the public school system here in New Orleans in 1960. When I look at the Norman Rockwell painting and I see myself, I always say that the lesson I took away was a lesson that Dr. King tried to teach all of us, and that was that we should never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin. I crossed a picket line, a mob every day for a whole year. There was a woman there to greet me. She did everything she could to make my day fun. She not only taught me, but she read stories to me. We played games. I knew that if I got past the mob and inside of the building, I was going to have a great day. And it was because of her. So she showed me her heart. And I began to realize that there was no way she was like the people outside. I couldn't judge her the same way. And so I believe at that moment, I learned the lesson that Dr. King died trying to teach us.
For a long time, people fought to get the King holiday in, and it finally got achieved nearly 25 years ago. But it was sermons, talks, meetings, lunches, and one day I said to myself, this is wrong. If Martin Luther King were here, he'd say, that's not what I want on my day. I teamed up with John Lewis in the House and many Republican and Democratic colleagues of mine in the Senate.
We felt that Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of service, and his day, that federal holiday, should be a day of service.
When the Congress passed the legislation, it was sort of like a reading wedding vows, that we were marrying a commitment to serve the common good.
My father said an individual has not started to live until he or she can rise above the narrow confines of his or her individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of humanity. He would certainly applaud the fact that our nation has set aside a day where we can become more other-centered rather than self-centered and really focus on the broader concerns of humanity, because that's really the person that he was and the way that he lived. Nothing's insignificant. As you're celebrating the King Day, remember you are important, you're significant, and you have something that you can offer to make humanity a better place.
We at the Corporation for National and Community Service are the federal agency that is so proud to be leading the Martin Luther King Day of service and volunteerism throughout the country. We are asking people on Martin Luther King Day to volunteer in their community. Ask a friend or family member or a coworker, or find someone who may be lonely or feeling isolated and ask them to join you and serve your neighborhood. We're asking people not just on Martin Luther King Day, but to volunteer throughout the year and help others and serve.
As Coretta Scott King proclaimed,
The greatest gift Martin could receive
is if people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds
celebrate the holiday
by performing individual acts of kindness
through service to others.
So I would like to also now mention that Martin Luther King was trying to give a new definition to greatness. And he was saying that the ones who are the greatest among you are the ones who are serving others. And this has become a tradition later on, that every day of Martin Luther King, that members of the community were doing community service in their own city and around. And Syracuse is no different, that we also have wonderful community leaders who have been organizing service opportunities to serve the ones who are unfortunate and do not have enough means to support themselves. So I have one more video to show you that our leaders, especially our Common Councilor Helen Hudson, were leading in our south side of neighborhood with some volunteer opportunities. So let me quickly share that video also.
This is the national holiday honoring the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And while many have the day off of work and everybody's off of school, hundreds of volunteers geared up this morning for a day of service in honor of Dr. King. The volunteers gathered at the Southwest Community Center this morning, collecting donations of food and winter clothing, an annual tradition now in its 19th year.
We started doing it because we listened, and we listened closely. When Martin Luther King Day was put into place, his son made a statement, and he said it's not a day off, it's a day on, and it's a day of service. So as a community, we have continued to do this day of service.
And Martin Luther King Day was designated as a national day of service by Congress in 1994.
Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you
Okay, so that was another little example from our community during the service day. And there was a wonderful quote that Common Councilor Helen Hudson has shared, that Martin Luther King's son said that it was not a day off to just take a vacation or something. It's a day on. It should be day. We should be out there active and searching out the people who needs help and be there. That is how our city can be greater. So talking about all these wonderful ideas, there's not a better person in our city to can really reflect on these conversations. That we have a special guest tonight, my colleague, my respected colleague that I look up to her, I follow her example. We have Professor Karen Harrison from Onondaga Community College, that she has been serving as the communication studies discipline professor for almost 30 years now, 29 years. And we are so sad that she's actually announced that she'll be retiring at the end of this semester. But we know retirement doesn't mean just kind of take it off or something. She's going to be more active in the community, and there'll be more leadership over there. And we are going to be looking forward to her leadership. And she's also our neighbor. She's literally a stone throw away from our RISE Center, that she's right next to her as a neighbor. And we have been doing a lot of wonderful organizations and activities together. On the campus, she was also member of the original team for the National Coalition Building Institute, and she was a trained facilitator to support people to have a conversation and coalitions with one another. And she was part of also the Diversity Council for many years. She was also one of the original team starting the police and race conversations on our campus. She's also a part of the 100 Black Men, because her husband also the president of the 100 Black Men. And she's also one of the founding members of the Women of Pearls. That is the organization also advocating for the other women in the community. So she has been doing many, many things in there. So I would like to now give the microphone to her, that she can share her stories and share her inspirations with us, since our name is RISE Center and we share inspirations with one another. So good night, Professor Harrison. Welcome to our program.
Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, my friend Tim Senka, for inviting me to be a part of the RISE Center RISE Talks. This is my first time being a part of this great event, and I am really happy to be here. I know that that community service is such an important part of the work of the RISE Center, and that's clearly visible in all the things that you guys do within this community, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I am truly honored to be here. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen with you. And start my presentation. A lot of what you talked about, I was so happy to hear, because I hope not to be too redundant in some of the quotes. You know, Martin Luther King had 1,000 quotes that we, talk about. And so now I have different Martin Luther King quotes, so you can see some of them there. But in my message tonight, I'd really like to focus in on Dr. King's legacy of community service as it relates to the civil rights movement during his lifetime. And more importantly, I'd like to focus on what constitutes community service for all of us today. Okay. While Dr. King has been gone for more than 50 years now, his life of service in the civil rights movement is a powerful example for us today. The civil rights movement during his era sought to end the long-standing system of racial oppression and segregation and exploitation of African Americans. The initial goal of the civil rights movement at that time was to make free and equal citizenship a reality for Black people in this country. Today, though, the ideals of the movement have greatly expanded to encompass things like human rights around the world, fighting poverty for all people, and ending unjust wars and exploitation. Dr. King's life of service was greatly influenced by his upbringing in the church, which has had a long and rich history of community activism and service. After college, he followed his father into the ministry. He became increasingly influenced by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and the philosophy of nonviolent resistance. At the young age of 26, he was recruited to lead the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott to end segregation on public transportation. It was that success that catapulted him, Dr. King, into leadership within the civil rights movement. He never envisioned himself on the world stage. He often said that. But sometimes life has a way of calling us to bigger opportunities. I think you would agree. But Dr. King was far from alone in his activism. Every leader stands on the shoulders of those who came before them, and Dr. King was no exception. In the struggle for Black freedom and equality, there were many, many, many courageous men and women dedicated who risked their livelihoods and even their lives in the service of others. It is no doubt that Dr. King was greatly inspired by the example and the life lived by Harry and Harriet Moore. I want to indulge just a moment because I want to share their story. Harry and Harriet Moore lived in Mims, Florida. They were both teachers at the only school for Black children at the time. In the late 1930s and throughout the 1940s, they were activists who registered Black voters all over the state of Florida, where at the time there was virulent Jim Crow system in place at the time that severely restricted the movements and the rights of Black people. Voter intimidation at that time was rampant. And there was sort of like a wink and a nod toward police brutality and police overreach. But the Mims, they led protests. They organized teams to go from door to register people to vote, to respond to their needs. But they paid a very, very high price. On Christmas night of 1951, a bomb was placed under their bedroom. And in the process, Harry died that night. And Harriet, she lingered in the hospital for 9 days and then she died. Their two young daughters were severely injured, but they survived. So you may wonder why I'm sharing this story. I'm sharing it to show you that there were many people who were willing to risk their lives and everything connected with it in the service of helping other people. This was one of the things that inspired Dr. King. I'd like to share the story of another person some of you may know. And that was the example of Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. She was born and raised on a cotton plantation in Mississippi in 1917. She and her family were sharecroppers, working poverty wages and subjected to the most egregious discrimination and exploitation. As a wife and a mother, she began to mobilize those in her community to register to vote and to advocate for better conditions for sharecroppers like herself. And she thought about the future of her children and the kind of world she wanted them to live in. So as I move toward my conclusion, the question that I pose to all of us is, what constitutes community service today? In contemplating that question, I think of the issues facing all of us today. Issues like voter suppression laws that are currently being passed in states all across the country that are deliberate attempts, it seems, to disenfranchise people of color, the young, and immigrants. In one of the richest countries in the world, we still have citizens living in poverty, and there is growing homelessness, especially in major cities like New York City and Chicago and San Francisco. And in these cities, it appears that they don't really have the ability or the will to prioritize low and middle income housing. And that is a problem all across the country. We're still protesting police brutality and overreach, especially against people of color. States like Florida are attempting to suppress the teaching of historical facts, the claim so that people don't feel bad about the past. Growing threats of domestic terrorism continue to be a threat to all of us. The alt-right march in Charlottesville, Virginia, a year and a half ago. What about the insurrection at the US Capitol? The rising groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, the fire bombings of Jewish synagogues and Muslim mosques. That's just to name a few. So while we don't necessarily have to risk our lives or our livelihood today, perhaps we can all find a way to extend ourselves in the service of our own individual communities. It may mean maybe stepping out of our comfort zones just a little bit, maybe being more creative. Here are some ways that you and I can get more involved in service to our communities. These are just some ideas. Maybe we can use social media to share support for social justice and civil rights causes. Maybe we can reshare what others are saying as well. Perhaps we can use our talents to drive change. Think, with over 60% of volunteering opportunities identified as skill-based, maybe we can find a way to advance our own knowledge and skills in the service of others. We can advocate with our employers to adopt or strengthen diversity and inclusion practices. Perhaps we can amplify and promote underrepresented voices in our own communities, some of those marginalized voices, like the handicapped, like immigrants, like the elderly. Perhaps we can create space for dialogue and exchange of information and ideas. We can also seek to understand the land in which we occupy and become involved with activist groups advocating for social justice and voting rights and ending homelessness. Perhaps we can shrink the inequality gap by giving of our time to combat food insecurity and homelessness. And of course, my favorite is to host delicious community dinners, much like the CNY RISE Center, which I truly love. I think we can all make a difference if we make a commitment in our hearts and with our time and with our resources to extend a hand to others. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Harrison, to again being us tonight and share your inspirations with us. It's just an honor for us to be able to share these conversations with you, because you are a community leader for us, and you have been through different generations to see the progresses or sometimes unfortunately declines in the society, and still have the passion to go forward and make the life better for the next generation. So I'm right now getting a number of questions through social media, through YouTube, through my text. Actually, some of my members are texting me about some questions, so they want to hear more of your ideas and perspective. One of the questions I just received that we have been hearing about the Black History Month throughout the years, especially as an immigrant ourselves. We're kind of learning the culture and the new land and trying to adjust. We a lot of times do not see it from the other side of the perspective. That one of our members is asking that, what does Black History Month means for the African American generation or the Black kids? Or what does it really mean for them to experience that Black History Month? What did you experience so far, especially for the Black community? What do they mean for them to have this month to celebrate?
So are you asking, what does Black history mean to African Americans today? Okay. Yes. Well, it's interesting that someone would ask that, because there is a long history with Black History Month. I'll go back to the fact that it was first initiated as Black History Week in 1926. And that was in response to the fact that people at that time thought, well, since slavery is over, Black people are no longer relevant. They don't have a story. They don't have anything that they've contributed. And so the idea that Dr. Carter Woodson invented and created this whole idea around Black History Week, many of you may know. And then, of course, in 1976, it was extended to Black History Month when President Gerald R. Ford decreed a month-long celebration. Why? Because it's so important to share the history of a significant number of our American citizens who have contributed since 1619 to the building of this country. And so it's really important for young people today who in some instances may be alienated, who may feel that they have nothing to contribute and nobody that they know of has contributed anything. Sometimes in school, we don't really get the whole idea or a complete picture of the contributions of other people, people of color, that have been made in this country. So it is extremely significant. And I'm thankful that we still celebrate Black History Month, because if we don't have an idea of the contributions we've made, we tend to become irrelevant in our own minds. And it all starts with what's in our own minds and hearts.
Thank you so much again for that. Another experience that as far as I can tell, many of our members do not even know the history behind it. That it started as a week and then went to a month from there. And also it was the effort after the Civil Rights Movement in 1970s, that it becomes a month of just focusing on this huge topic that needs to be resolved, because that's one of the biggest issues in this country, that we need to somehow build those bridges between one another, instead of just kind of alienating, like you mentioned, that the others and then the mine against them. And unfortunately, there is a lot of division has been created in our country. Actually, our country is a United States of America. We are united. We are supposed to be united rather than being separated. So thank you so much for highlighting that for us also. I also received another question saying that, how can we create cross-cultural cross-community service opportunities so we can help one another. So like, let's say as a Muslim community, we help our own Muslim people. And then as a Black community, they help their own Black people. But how can we create cross-cultural opportunities that we can all help one another and we can all rise together? So any kind of ideas or suggestions that can be an example for the next generation?
I think I would take a page out of what the CNY RISE Center does, because you guys do it so well. You extend your hand of fellowship, because everybody working together begins with relationships. And if people can establish a relationship with someone who doesn't look like them, maybe speak the same language, or perhaps even eat the same kind of foods, that's a starting point for coming together in relationships. And then on top of that, when we establish those relationships, we can see what the needs between each other are. And once we're in relationship, we open our hearts to help in any way we can. It's sort of a natural thing that people do. But I think it starts with building dialogue and relationships with one another. And that's why I love the community dinners. I'll keep mentioning those because they are a lot of fun, and it's a way to really learn about other people. People stay in their own little bubbles, but if we can sort of step out of those bubbles and just extend our hand, we don't have to be perfect in what we say and in everything that we do. But I think people can read a good heart and good intentions. And I think that's a perfect place to start. And what I really like is the fact that Martin Luther King's birthday in January is not just a day to listen to his old speeches or take a day off. I love the idea that Martin Luther King's birthday is a day of service. That is the best thing about that celebration. We celebrate, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln's birthday and Washington's birthday, and they don't seem to be days of service. But now that we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday, we attach ourselves to his legacy, and his legacy was service. So it just only makes sense that we would surround ourselves as a day of service on his birthday and celebrating it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much again, also highlighting some of the events we have been doing at the RISE Center, because I have seen some of the examples myself when I was at those programs. I remember one of our guests that night who was, I think, more than 60, 70 years old, and she had the police chief at her table for the dinner time. And she said throughout her whole life, she never had a single conversation at a table with the police, like never really asked a question or talked to them. That police was also like somebody out there, never like talked to them or whatever. It was sometimes totally alienated identity for them. And then she was like, I really enjoyed to hear their ideas or their perspective. And I remember some of our Muslim friends saying that until I came to that dinner, I never talked to a Jewish person before, but now we share the whole idea of, the different traditions and cultures, and we have the similar diet with the kosher and halal or something like that. Those dinners definitely make a big kind of an initial jump to get that connections. And unfortunately nowadays we have to do virtually with these programs, and hopefully after COVID we can get back together and reinitiate those connections together at the same time. Since you mentioned about the birthday of Martin Luther King and is associated with the service day, we also have another question. It's also my question also, that throughout the general society, it is not really being really emphasized that day of service. Why is that? Like, for example, when I lived in Utah, Colorado, California for many years, and I was in the schools and connections there. When it was the Martin Luther King Day, that it was still celebrated. There was a lot of kind of conversations, speeches, guest speakers or whatever, but there wasn't a lot of focus about the community service when I was there. I kind of barely hearing it, but not really experiencing it. Since I came to Syracuse, I started seeing it with my own eyes, that I saw the community members making a big effort. I remember holding my daughter's hand when she was, I don't know, 5 or 6 or something, and we were out there in a little warehouse boxing goods and sending out with a truck, and there was like, I don't know, 35, 40 people at the door waiting with their cars or vans, volunteering to take the boxes to the people's house or something like that. I saw that in action in Syracuse, and I was so happy to see that. But why around the nation it's not really being emphasized as a service day rather than just kind of remember Martin Luther King and just kind of be that? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I would say we happen to be very fortunate to live in a city that has a long history of abolitionism and activism. And this was the city that had the Jerry Rescue. Some people may know about that, where an escaped slave came to Syracuse and the whole city, got together to protect him from the slave catchers wanting to take him back to the South to slavery. So this city has had a long history.
I'm sorry, what was that called again?
This was the Jerry Rescue. In fact,
thank you. Thanks for sharing.
And I'm only sharing that to say that the city of Syracuse has a long history of activism. And in fact, there is a statue downtown near, I think, Armory Square that highlights the Jerry Rescue. And this was members of the citizens of the city of Syracuse at that time who, protected this runaway slave back in 48, 49. And protected him from being taken back to slavery. So there were very active abolitionists, etc. You also have to remember in this area that we are quite close to the city of Auburn. And Auburn was where Harriet Tubman finally resided, and she was prolific in helping people in her community. A lot of community service with her and the people in her church. So this area has a long history of that. But some areas don't seem to have that. And perhaps because, and I'm only guessing, traditionally, they haven't been very diverse. You mentioned you lived in Utah. I don't know what diversity is like in Utah, but I do know that in some places like maybe Utah or Iowa, if you have 99% of the population that is white, that celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday may not be a priority. But I will say this, when the Black Lives Matter protests last year in 20 and 21 were taking place across the country, I happened to be looking at the news one day, and they were showing protests that were happening for Black Lives Matter and against police brutality and for George Floyd all around the world, in London, in Paris, in Italy, all over the world. And I also saw protesters for Black Lives Matter in Iowa and Utah. So things are changing. And at some of these protests, there were no people of color, but they were still protesting and supporting it. And I thought, wow, that's progress. That's change. And that's the change I think we all kind of want to see. So there it is.
And thank you. And again, everything you say just keep bringing more and more ideas to my mind and more experiences. So thank you so much for your wisdom. And I want to tie that idea also, that progress you mentioned. I just received a message through the YouTube chat that one of our members were asking, Dr. King passed away in 1968, but what has happened since then to accomplish his vision? Did we have any progress? What has been happening since then to now, since you were able to experience some of that throughout the time to see, did really his mission stop there with him, or did it continue? Did he have a progress? Can you reflect on that after Dr. King?
I think Dr. King, from what I understand and from my readings and research, has always said that the progress is never a straight line going up really fast. And so there are ebbs and flows, and sometimes we seem to step back, but then we keep going forward. I mean, if you just look at old reels, old newsreels, if you just delve into history to see what life was like for African Americans, really constrained to living in certain places because of housing redlining, because of not being hired in certain jobs and oppression. I remember my parents telling me in Richmond, Virginia, where they were from, how they had to sit on the back of a bus. Everybody paid the same fare, but the black people had to sit on the back of the bus. And white people, if they got on the bus and they wanted any seat, they can make anybody black move and they could take that seat. So there has been progress. Are we there totally? No, not by a long shot. But one thing I love about the civil rights movement that Dr. King was such a big part of, it's widened out now. It has expanded to include Native Americans, immigrants. It includes the women's movement. So all of these other things have been launched from the original civil rights movement. That's progress. The fact, of course, that we had a Black president. I mean, who would have thought? If my parents were alive, they would have been dumbfounded. They could have never imagined that. So there has been a lot of movement. There has been progress, but it's definitely not enough. I would add one other thing. At the time that our president, Barack Obama, was elected, somebody showed an interview of Dr. King. And the interviewer asked Dr. King, do you think there would ever be a Black president? And Dr. King smiled and he said, I don't know, maybe in 40 years or so, but I'm not sure, but I kind of think in 40 years. And Barack Obama was elected president literally 40 years later.
Wow, I didn't know that he mentioned that.
40 years later.
We say in our Turkish culture that at that moment, God made him talk, that God knew about the 40 years. So this is kind of used him as an avenue to talk.
I like that.
Yeah, wonderful. I also have another great question from one of our listeners that he says that he is a teacher at a public school. And, you know, again, just like we mentioned throughout the year, the Martin Luther King Day comes and they mention in school or something, but he's asking as a teacher, what can I do more? What can I do really meaningful activities or programs for the students so they can really understand and appreciate this whole legacy and, you know, community service and everything. What can you recommend, since you have been a teacher professor for many years, that a public school teacher can do in the classroom with their students?
I think acknowledging students of all racial backgrounds and ethnicities, bringing in information and attaching their own cultures or their ancestors' cultures to the lesson that they're learning, so that there's some continuity between where we've come from and where we're going and where we are today. Also, I think teachers should prioritize inclusiveness and not be afraid to step out of the box a little bit. I know there are a lot of constraints on teachers. You know, they have lesson plans. The state says they have to teach certain things. But I would think, I sort of imagine if I were a history teacher in an elementary school, I would try to make history come alive for students. And there are lots of ways to do that. Role playing, watching movies, just doing things outside of the box, because I think children need to be inspired. And I think they need to know that there's continuity with what happened in the past to the present and where we're going in the future. And that gives them a sense of belonging. And students need, I feel, to have a sense of belonging. Having taught for 29 years, students want to know where they fit into the whole scheme of things. And they're trying to put together where their life can go. But when we see what others have contributed, when we see what others have done, and we're able to place ourselves maybe in their shoes or be inspired by what they've done. And I think it's incumbent upon teachers to really make that point and to give them an idea that they can do almost anything. I go back to the fact that Martin Luther King, when he was tapped to lead the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, he was 26 years old. That's when he stepped on the world stage at 26. That's so young to lead a movement that was in the city of Montgomery, but morphed out to a national and international movement. So, I mean, even young people, and I think some young people are demonstrating that. The Parkland students, I mean, students all over the country are being mobilized. I saw that when I was at various Black Lives Matter protests. I saw a lot of young people. I saw white people and senior citizens. I saw moms with little babies in carriages. Everybody came together. And I think that's what young people need to see as well.
Thank you again. And as an educator myself also, that there are, like you said, there are so many ways that can be happening. And you also mentioned about the legacy of our own community, that we invited a guest speaker from the Onondaga Historical Society, and she gave us the whole story of the Seneca Turnpike over there. And there were many underground railroad houses literally next to our building, or some of them on the corner there. And having a little kind of a tour with the students can give them a whole different perspective of the city they live in and what they can be involved with. Like you said, they can be taken to the Harriet Tubman house and then kind of hear the stories from there and being part of it. So there are so many different opportunities. And like you said, I'm proud to be a part of this kind of a community that a lot of women's rights conversations started from upstate New York. The first convention, I believe, for the Black people were started in this neighborhood and things like that. Like you said, if we can make that continuation of this is what happened here, and as the next generation, we can continue and take the torch from there, can be a huge benefit, absolutely. I also would like to now kind of put a little pause in our conversation here that you mentioned about such a dream that, Dr. King had, and about 40 years later, we also had a Black president. There's a little video from one of the universities prepared that kind of had the same speech that President Obama has kind of continued with the same speech from Dr. King. So, and I also want to share the inspiration I mentioned from our inspiration as a Turkish community from the Fethullah Gülen. Let me share that video with you, and then we can kind of close it up from there with our final thoughts at the end there. So give me 1 second.
Okay.
Dr. King was the passionate voice that awakened the conscience of a nation and inspired people all over the world.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men
are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Don't just aspire to make a living. Aspire to make a difference.
If I have learned anything in my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope. The power of one person, a Washington, a Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world by giving people hope. It matters not your gender, your ethnic or religious background, your orientation, or your social status. Our struggles in this world are similar, and the lessons to overcome those struggles and to move forward, changing ourselves and changing the world around us, will apply equally to all.
There is not a Black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes.
Despite different culture background, different religious faith, or different race, we all same human being.
So that was the videos I want to share. As I mentioned, that the whole message of civil rights movement just went beyond the borders. That it was inspired by Dalai Lama or Malala from Afghanistan, and also, as I said, the Turkish scholar also was talking about that. Do you live for yourself or do you live for others? That's the big difference. And that is also, as I just mentioned in the beginning, that the new definition Dr. King has brought, that the greatness is the one, serving others. It's not about being great in other areas. Just like the cliche idea of we have so much in common, then we have differences. And whenever we go to deeper discussions, we just keep finding those commonalities. And after all, we are all part of the same humanity. We all have the same unity, that we can be a one society together. We are again so grateful for your time and your wisdom and your ideas to share with us. Is there anything you'd like to share for the closing this great program? I know there's a lot more to talk, but at least this was a little bit kind of a taste, a little preview of what some of our ideas out there that we recommend our members to go search. I am a librarian. Go to the libraries, search about what happened in the history, search what's happening right now. Be active in your community, be active in your society. And that is what we're trying to achieve at the RISE Center, to encourage people that we say, we rise by lifting others, and we just trying to find opportunities to help with the homeless people. Or there's a whole new group of, right now, new immigrants are coming from Afghanistan. And right now we are making conversation with the Blessing Box organization or the Interfaith Works to see how we can help those new families coming into our country. That is all about serving one another. And we just have a lot more to go. But we are so grateful for your friendship and your inspiration to us. Is there anything, as I said, you'd like to mention for closing our program with our listeners?
Yeah, I just like to repeat the last quote I had. It wasn't a quote actually, but just the last thing I shared. And that was the idea that we can all make a difference if we make a commitment to extend our hands to others. It doesn't necessarily have to cost anything, but if we can just do that, and then we start to see the humanity in each other. I don't know what more I can say beyond that.
Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely, it's the humanity in one another. That's our starting point. And I remember when I did the TED Talk, that was also my topic, is that humanity should be our biggest common ground. The one that we should at least have a Venn diagram. The center can be the humanity. We can build from there. So thank you so much again, Professor Harrison, being the guest tonight for the RISE Talk. And we are looking forward to long-time partnership and neighborhood and be neighbor together down the road. And hopefully next time we can be in person at our center to have some Turkish coffee together. Appreciate that again. And thank you to everybody who joined us tonight for this special conversation. And hopefully it gave you some more ideas about the Black History Month and what we can do for our community and how we can start new community service ideas. Thank you so much for your questions. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also watch our previous videos that we have done in the past together. And I also want to finally mention that a week from today, we will also do an interfaith program, the same exact Wednesday night, 6 p.m., that we'll be discussing the value of the human health in Bible and in Quran, that we are going to be having religious leaders from the Christian community and Muslim community, and we'll be getting together to do a Quran and Bible study. And you can also watch that from the same link from our channel, cnyricecenter.org/live. So come back next Wednesday, and we'll be happy to join us, have you in our group there. So thank you so much, and thank you, Professor Harrison. Have a wonderful night, and see you at the next
Thank you, my friend.
event.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.